You already know the exact moment you stopped trying to explain yourself. Not the fight, the one after the fight, when you realized the story about you was already written, and your job was just to keep playing the part. You're Frank, by the way, and if you were the black sheep of your family, this one's for you. Because what got called your worst quality is usually the thing that saved your life. Let's start where it actually shows up. Not in the memories, in the behavior. You are almost impossible to depend on emotionally, in the way other people mean it. Not because you're cold. You'll drive 4 hours to help a friend move a couch. You'll remember someone's dog's name for a decade. You just don't reach the other direction. When something goes sideways in your life, the first move isn't to call anyone. The first move is to handle it, quietly, and mention it 6 months later like a weather report. Oh yeah, that thing. Took care of it. You have a reflex to leave. Rooms, jobs, cities, relationships. Not dramatically. You just get very quiet, and then you're gone. People who love you have described this as a door closing without a sound. You've been told you're hard to read. You are not hard to read. You are hard to argue with because you already left. You have a very specific relationship with anger. It's not loud. It's fuel. You channel it into work, into the gym, into projects, into a business, into learning something the people who dismissed you couldn't learn if you gave them a manual. There is a researcher named Dorrance Hall at Michigan State who spent time interviewing 30 adults who identified as the black sheep of their families. And one of the things she noticed was what she called an undertow of anger. An anger that didn't sit still, that got redirected into productive life goals. That's not a personality trait. That's a documented pattern. You didn't invent it. You just happen to be very good at it. And the last one, the boundary thing. You can say no without an apology attached. It took years, and it cost you people, but you can do it. You can decide someone is not good for you and act on that decision without a committee meeting in your own head. Most people cannot do this. You had to learn it early because saying yes to everything didn't protect you either. Those 4 things, the hyper-independence, the exit reflex, the productive anger, the boundary muscle, those aren't flaws. Those are the operating system that got installed when you were the designated problem in a house that needed one. Because that's what the role actually is. It's not that you were bad. It's not that you were difficult. It's that the family system needed a place to put its dysfunction, and you got assigned the address. Here's how the research talks about it. Family therapists and researchers who look at this, including work summarized in Psychology Today in 2024, describe scapegoating as a system function. It's a way for a family to keep the focus off the person who's actually running the dysfunction. Someone at the top of the system is not okay. A parent, usually. And instead of the family looking at that, the family finds a member to carry the label. That kid gets called the difficult one, the dramatic one, the sensitive one, the ungrateful one, the one who's always causing problems. And everybody else gets to feel like the problem is contained. The system, by the way, works best with exactly one victim. That's the part that hurts to hear. It's not that your siblings were monsters. It's that the math of the system rewarded them for staying on the other side of the line. If they joined in on you, they got status. If they defended you, they became you. Most people, at 8 years old, choose the status. You would have too. You just didn't get the option. There's a study from 2023 by Vignando and Bizumic, published in the Journal of Psychology, that looked at this from a different angle. They found that higher perceived maternal grandiose narcissism predicted more scapegoating in the family, and it worked best when there was also a golden child in the mix. A divide and conquer setup. One kid can do no wrong. The other kid can do no right. And both kids stay hooked on the parent's approval, because one is chasing more of it, and the other is trying to earn any of it. Nobody wins that game. It's not designed to be won. It's designed to keep everyone looking up at the same person for the verdict. And you can push back on this. A lot of people who lived it push back on this because it sounds like you're blaming a parent. And Gen X in particular was raised to not do that. You were raised to say your parents did their best. You were raised to not air family business. So when someone puts a clinical frame on what happened in your house, part of you flinches. That flinch is also part of the training. You're allowed to look at the system without hating the people in it. Those are two separate operations. There's a 2024 meta-analysis by Eridus and colleagues in the Journal of Family Psychology that pooled 19 studies on differential parenting. What they found is careful, and I want to say it carefully. When one sibling in a family gets less warmth and more hostility than another sibling, that child tends to show more acting out behavior. The effect is small, but it's real. So the loop is real. The kid who gets treated worse acts worse. The kid who acts worse gets treated worse. And by the time anyone outside the family is watching, all they see is the acting out. They don't see the input. They just see the output and call it your personality. You know what your personality actually was. You were the noticer. That's the framing that keeps coming up in the more recent writing on this, including a piece from Cottonwood Psychology in 2026 that leans into it directly. The black sheep is often the truth teller, the one who said the thing out loud, the one who asked why dad was like that, the one who mentioned that mom had been drinking since 2 in the afternoon, the one who pointed out that grandma's comments about your cousin weren't actually funny. You saw the room clearly, and instead of being thanked for it, you got labeled for it. Because a family that isn't ready to look at itself doesn't need a witness. It needs a suspect. And the markers of difference matter here too. The same body of writing points out that certain traits made a kid more likely to get slotted into this role. Being queer, being the first one headed to college, getting sober while everyone else kept drinking, leaving the religion, being artistic in a family that valued being practical, being sensitive in a family that valued being tough. Any place where you didn't reflect the family back to itself, that became the crack the label got poured into. Before we keep going, one thing I want you to sit with. The label was never about who you actually are. It was about what the system needed you to be. Those are not the same person. You've been carrying around a description of yourself that was written by people who needed the description more than they needed you. Now let's talk about what you did with it, because here's where it gets interesting. Dorrance Hall's 2018 study, the one in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships, didn't just document how these kids got hurt. It documented what they built. She identified 5 resilient strategies that showed up in her interviews with self-identified black sheep. Not 5 wounds, 5 strategies. First, seeking support from communication networks outside the family. Building a second family out of friends, coworkers, chosen people. You probably have one. You probably have 3 or 4 people in your life who know more about your interior than anyone you're related to by blood. That's not a betrayal. That's a build. Second, creating and negotiating boundaries. Deciding what you would and wouldn't accept, who you would and wouldn't see, what you would and wouldn't discuss at holidays. Not going scorched earth, just drawing lines and holding them, quietly, over years. Third, rebuilding while recognizing the negative experiences. This one is the grown-up version. You don't pretend it was fine. You don't pretend it was a nightmare either. You look at it, you name what it was, and you keep constructing a life on top of it anyway. That's not denial. That's not wallowing. That's the middle move most people never make. Fourth, sometimes downplaying the lived experience of marginalization, which sounds like a bad thing, and can be. But in her research, it also functioned as a coping tool. A way to say, it wasn't the worst thing. Other people had it worse. I'm still here. Used lightly, it's survival. Used heavily, it's a lid on the pot. Most black sheep do both, depending on the day. And fifth, living authentically despite disapproval. This is the one that quietly runs your whole adult life. You made choices your family didn't approve of, and you made them anyway. Career, partner, where you live, who you talk to, whether you go to church, whether you drink, whether you have kids, whether you're out. Every one of those was a vote against the description they wrote for you, and you kept casting the vote. Dorrance Hall also found something that I think is the whole point. Many of the people she interviewed said they eventually became proud of the exact traits they were originally marginalized for. The values, the choices, the identity, the sensitivity, the refusal to go along. The thing the family pathologized became the thing the adult built a life around. That's not a redemption arc. That's just what happens when you stop letting the wrong committee grade your paper. Now let's talk about the exit, because Gen X in particular has a very specific version of this, and the numbers back it up. Carl Pillemer at Cornell ran a study, the Cornell Family Estrangement and Reconciliation Project, that surveyed more than 1,300 Americans, and he found that 27% of adults over 18 had cut off contact with a family member. That's roughly 67 million people. He called it a problem hiding in plain sight. A 2024 Harris poll, cited in Knowable magazine, pushed that figure higher. 35% of adults reported being estranged from an immediate family member, meaning a parent or a sibling. But the Gen X-specific piece is more interesting. A 2025 survey by Talker Research with Talkspace polled 2,000 Americans and asked who had gone no contact with a friend or family member in the past year. Gen Z came in at 60%, Millennials at 50%, Boomers at 20%. Gen X was 38%, right in the middle. Which sounds unremarkable until you think about what it actually means. You were raised in a generation that was told not to talk about family business, not to complain, not to be dramatic, to keep it moving. And nearly 4 in 10 of you, in a single year, still made the call to walk away from someone. Quietly. Without a hashtag. Without a therapist explaining it on TikTok. You just did it. The same way you did everything else. By handling it and mentioning it later like a weather report. There's one more piece of research worth sitting with, because it complicates the walkaway story in a useful way. A researcher named Ren Resek, whose work was cited in Yahoo Lifestyle earlier this year, found that 81% of estrangements from mothers eventually end. 69% of estrangements from fathers eventually end. Most no contact is not permanent. Most of it is a season, sometimes a long season. But the door tends to reopen, in some form, more often than not. I'm not telling you that to guilt you. If you cut someone off, you had reasons, and you don't need me to relitigate them. I'm telling you because if you're a Gen X black sheep, you may be carrying the belief that walking away is the final act of the movie. It's usually not. It's usually the intermission. What comes after is different from what came before, and that difference is where you actually get to write the ending. There's a smaller piece of Dorrance Hall's work I want to end on, because it changes how you look at every family event you've white-knuckled through. She also studied turning points, the moments in family life where things shift. Weddings, births, funerals, illnesses, the obvious ones. And the finding, summarized by Michigan State, was this. It wasn't the event itself that determined whether the marginalized member felt more excluded or less. It was how the family communicated around the event. The same funeral could pull a black sheep back in if the family made room, or push them further out if the family closed ranks. The event was neutral. The communication was everything. Which means every wedding you sat through where you felt invisible, every funeral where you felt like a guest at your own family's grief, every hospital waiting room where nobody updated you, that wasn't you being sensitive. That was a family system, at a turning point, making a choice about you. And you, being the noticer, noticed. You always did. So here's where this lands. If you were the black sheep, the label was never a diagnosis of who you are. It was a job assignment from a system that needed the job filled. And the traits it cost you to survive that job. The independence, the exit reflex, the anger into fuel conversion, the boundary muscle, the refusal to perform a version of yourself you didn't recognize. Those are the exact traits that make people become the ones who break the pattern instead of passing it down. The research doesn't call you damaged. The research calls you resilient. There is a difference, and you've been living inside that difference for 40 or 50 years, whether anybody in your family ever said it out loud or not. They probably won't. That's all right. You already know. That's the whole thing. There's another one on the screen right now. Go watch that one. Actually, before you click off, hang with me for one more beat, because there's a piece of this I skipped, and it's the piece that matters most if you're the one still doing the work. The cycle breaker part. You've probably heard that phrase and rolled your eyes at it, because it's been chewed up by every wellness account on the internet. But strip the packaging off and look at what it actually means in your specific case. A cycle breaker is not somebody who fixed their family. A cycle breaker is somebody who refused to hand the same job assignment to the next person down the line. That's it. That's the whole definition. You didn't do it by having a big conversation. You did it by not casting the role. You didn't pick a scapegoat in your own house. You didn't sort your kids into a golden one and a problem one. You didn't laugh at the sensitive one at the dinner table. You didn't tell the queer one to keep it to themselves. You didn't pick the noticer and turn them into the suspect. If you have kids, nieces, nephews, students, younger coworkers who look up to you, you probably watched yourself in real time refuse to do the thing that was done to you. Sometimes you caught yourself about to do it and stopped mid-sentence. That mid-sentence stop is the entire ballgame. That is the pattern ending in your hand on a Tuesday with nobody clapping. And here's the part the research keeps circling back to. The people Dorrance Hall interviewed didn't describe themselves as victims. They described themselves as people who built something. A career, a chosen family, a relationship with a partner that looked nothing like what they grew up watching. A version of themselves they actually recognized when they looked in the mirror. The wound was in the story. The build was in the present tense. You do not owe anybody a reconciliation. You do not owe anybody an estrangement either. What you owe yourself is an accurate description of what happened, of what you did with it, and of who you actually are underneath the label that got stapled to you before you could read. The label was a costume. You wore it because the room required a costume. The room isn't the whole world. It never was. You just couldn't see past it when you were 4 feet tall. You can see past it now. You've been seeing past it your entire adult life. That's why you left the rooms you left. That's why you built the life you built. That's why the anger became fuel instead of a fire that took the house down. That's why the door closes quietly instead of slamming. That's why, when someone new in your life asks you a real question, you can actually answer it. Because you spent 40 years figuring out what the real answer was without any help from the people who should have been asking. All right, go watch the one on the screen. I think it's the right one for you.